Books, books. I like books. I'm gonna read them all. Hi readers, Chris here. Welcome to my channel where I review fantasy, Stephen King, and all sorts of books. Today I'm going to be doing my January wrap-up and my February TBR. January was a whirlwind of a reading month already. First month of the year, and it was a little crazy. If you watched my vlog, you will know that my reading varied drastically throughout the month. I started out reading 7 books, and then I was only reading 1 or 2 books, and then I was back to reading 6 books. So it was a journey, but I ended the month with finishing 7 books, which I think is really good for me. So now I'm going to attempt to rank all of the books that I read in January. And this month, the top book was really easy to pick. The bottom book was really easy to pick, but the middle was a little bit difficult. So we're going to give it a try, starting with my least favorite book of January, which is not a book that I hated at all. And that's going to be The Hunger of the Gods by Gwynne. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about this book here because I just filmed my review of this book, which is either going to go up before I post this video or shortly after. This was a buddy read that I did with David over at David's Book Reviews. We buddy read the first book, The Shadow of the Gods. We buddy read this book, The Hunger of the Gods. I think we both had pretty similar feelings about it. Even though it's on the bottom of my list, I did not hate this book, but you're going to have to watch my review to learn more about my feelings on this one. Even though I didn't hate it, there is a reason why it ended up at the bottom. But let's move on to number 6, which is going to be Twin Crowns by Katherine Doyle and Catherine Weber. I had to remind myself of their names because they're both named Catherine, which makes it really funny. But anyway, this book was recommended to me by one of my followers over on Instagram. I just actually asked for new recommendations for this year. I haven't asked for booktube recommendations yet, but I will be sometime this month, so you can look out for that. But in the meantime, I read Twin Crowns. It's a really cute book. The only reason it ended up lower on the list is just because the competition was super tough this month. But this story is about twin girls. They were separated at birth. One was raised in a castle as a princess. One was raised in the forest with a bunch of witches. And then they kind of have this parent trap situation where they switch places and a whole bunch of chaos ensues. What I want to say about this one right here, why it ended up lower, there is nothing like blatantly bad about this book. Like, it's a super cute book and it's a super cute read. The only reason that it ended up lower on my list is because I was expecting more of a, let's say, an older YA type story, and I definitely think that this one skews a bit younger. It skews a bit younger in the characters, in the romance, and the plot. It's very much, and I hate using this phrase, but I feel like it's appropriate here. It's very like vanilla. It's very predictable. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, it's a cute story, and I could definitely see people liking, enjoying this one, especially younger readers. It's just not personally what I was expecting. I was expecting something, I don't know, a little bit edgier, I guess, because it's such a newer book and you've got 2 people working on it, but that's not what I got. So again, there's nothing wrong with the book. It's not bad by any means. It's just because it didn't meet what my expectations were. That's why it ended up a little bit lower on my list. And obviously, that's a me problem. That's a me problem, not the book's fault. My 5th favorite book of January is Dreams Lie Beneath by Rebecca Ross. This is another book that I think was super cute. This was actually an Owl Crate book box book that I think I got, I want to say like early 2021. So it had been sitting on my shelf for about a year. If you've been following me for a while, you know it's been like really hit or miss with some of these book box books, but I do think that this one was a hit. Again, the only reason why it's lower is just because the competition is tough, but I actually think this one was a hit. This was a pretty good read. It's about a young girl. She's a magician. She lives in this world that's been cursed by nightmares. There was this like mountain kingdom, and because like there was the court there, like the court like betrayed the ruler there. They stabbed him in the back, and with this guy's like dying breath, he cursed the land, and now everyone's plagued by nightmares. But if the right set of events happen, they could potentially break the curse. And there's a lot going on in this book, and there's a lot of good stuff. I love the whole like the dreams and the nightmares. There's a romance in here because it's YA fantasy, so of course there has to be a romance. But there's actually a lot of good things in here, and the story took some unexpected turns, which I thought was refreshing because, like I said about Twin Crowns, a lot of Twin Crowns was predictable. I feel like this book was less predictable, so that's why it ended up a little bit higher in my ranking. My fourth favorite book in January was The Dream Thieves by Maggie Steifvater. This is the second book in the Raven cycle, so this is the sequel to the Raven Boys, and I loved the Raven Boys. I loved the Raven Boys when I read it in December. So this continues the story of, we have a young group of friends. There's 4 boys and 1 girl. The 4 boys all go to this prestigious private school, Avonlea, and Blue is like a girl in town who comes from a psychic family. Blue herself is not psychic, but she has the ability to like amp up people's powers, and they are like searching for this dead Welsh king who is supposed to be able to grant like all these wishes and desires. There's also things called ley lines, which are these energy, like magic energy superhighways that run through their town. Like there's a lot going on in here, a lot. And this particular book, I feel like in the first book, every character I feel like got their own arc. In this one, it really kind of focuses in on one of the boys named Ronan. And Ronan, this was not explored in book one, so I guess you could say it's a spoiler for book 1, but if you read the back of this one, it gives it away. And that is, Ronan has this ability to dream things, and when he dreams things, he can physically take things out of his dream and like bring them into the world. So for example, he has a pet raven named Chainsaw. Yes, Chainsaw. He dreamed a raven, and then he took the raven out of his dreams, and now he has a pet raven. So you can imagine that type of power has both good and bad uses. Ronan's not the only one that can do this, and of course others want this ability, so people are after him. This was a very interesting next step in this series. I will say that the one thing that I did find a little bit jarring is that I don't think that they never said that Ronan had this ability in the first book. Like if you go back and read it, I think it was probably hinted at because he did have the pet raven in book 1. No one knew where it came from, but they never explicitly stated it or said it. So when this book opens and you're automatically thrown into Ronan's dream world, it's like, whoa, where did this come from? So that was a little bit jarring, but overall, I mean, Maggie Steifvater just has such a way with characters, and if you don't know already, I love good characters and I love good character development, and this series definitely has it. So again, I loved this book. The only reason it's not higher is because of that one, like, I felt a little bit jarring in the beginning. But other than that, this book is amazing, and I can't wait to talk more about it. My third favorite book in January was a complete surprise to me, and that is The Beresford by Will Carver. This is not a book that I ever would have gone out and gotten on my own. But I won it in a giveaway that David at David's Book Reviews did over on his channel. Side note, David is always doing giveaways, so definitely go give him a follow if you haven't already, because you'll probably win something at some point. But anyway, because David is really into horror, he sent over a horror box and it had this book in it. I did a poll in my community tab. You voted for me to read the Beresford. I did, and I absolutely loved it. So it's about this apartment building called the Beresford, and everyone that walks through the door to like rent a room there, rent an apartment, ends up dying. And not only ends up dying, but like ends up being brutally murdered. Why am I smiling and laughing about that? Because the way that this book is written is just, it's so unique and so like, I don't know how to explain it other than just to read a little bit of it for you. So hold on a second while I pick a good spot out. Okay, this is not a chapter. It's about 30 pages into the book, and the story is broken up by this little, like, I don't even know what you want to call it, but, like, the story chapters are broken up by these little, like, inserts, and they're just hilarious. So this one's entitled, What Do You Want? And it says, what do you want? It should be simple. What music do you like? Well, definitely not Coldplay. I can't stand them. Their first album was great, but they're awful after that. And no ABBA. In fact, nothing of that ilk from around that era, or from that part of the world. Everything in the charts is manufactured and insipid now, too. I prefer to drive in silence these days rather than have the radio playing. Do you want to put a film on? Not sci-fi. I'm not in the mood for that at all. I'm all sick of the romantic comedies coming out of Hollywood at the moment. It's the same old poop. Even the people in them look almost identical. Hey kids, what do you fancy for dinner tonight? Not stir fry. We hate stir fry. And not that horrible pasta sauce you did the other week either. And definitely not soup again. What do you want to be when you grow up? I don't want to work in an office. Where do you want to work? Not a big corporate, but not a startup either. So, a reputable and established independent company, not in the city. Saying what you don't want, what you don't like, what you don't agree with is so much easier than the opposite. Deciding what you do want, the things that interest you, and standing for something requires belief. Belief in yourself, belief in something higher. Not committing to something that you want, no matter how small, does not protect you from never obtaining it. It prevents you from ever starting. Leaving you to walk through this thing you call life like it's purgatory. It is your waiting room for death. Start small, keep it simple, have a go, or go to hell. Can you say one thing that you do want? We want to belong. I love these little tidbits throughout this book. I don't know how to explain it, but this is the most delightful book I've ever read about murder. And yes, there is a ton of murder in this book. The body count is quite high. And not only is there a lot of murder, but it's quite brutal at times, like actually hacking up body parts and dissolving them in acid. And like, there's some gruesome details in here that are like, ooh. But it's also super witty and super hilarious, and it was such a surprise and such a delight. That's why it ended up so high on my list. Another book that was a surprise for me last month was Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. This is only the third book I've ever read by Sarah J. Maas, the second series. I have read Crescent City, The House of Earth and Fire, and then the sequel, The House of Sky and Breath. If you watched my reviews from those for those books, you will know that I had some issues, and I felt like I was kind of too old for Sarah J. Maas. She just came off as being like, I'm trying to be edgy and cool, and I didn't really care for it. I thought it was super vulgar. It didn't need to be that vulgar. Everyone's super hot. Everyone wants to have sex with each other, and I didn't feel like there was a lot of substance. In this book, however, I felt the complete opposite. This is much more of a YA book, so it's not vulgar. There might be like one or two curse words, but that's about it. And there's no sex, at least not as of yet. And the romance that there is, it's sweet and charming. It's not like vulgar like it is in Crescent City. So in this story, we have a young girl. She's an assassin. She's supposed to be like the world's greatest assassin, but she's been in prison, like locked up. She gets out of prison in the beginning of the book and is offered a chance at freedom if she'll come and compete in this tournament to be the king's champion. So basically, she's going to compete against all these other assassins. If she wins, she'll get a contract with the king, and once she completes that, she will get her freedom. But of course, once she gets to the capital, the kingdom, all this crazy stuff starts to happen, and the world just opens up. The world just opens up. This is only book 1 in a long series, so clearly there's a lot of room to grow from here. There's like secret dimensions and secret beasts, and magic is supposed to be gone, but there's magic stuff going on. There's these things called word marks, which can either open gates to other worlds or summon beasts and lost swords and dead queens. Oh, there's a lot going on in here, and I absolutely loved it. I loved it. I thought this is a great story. I definitely want to spend some more time talking about this one in depth because I feel so much differently about this than I did about her other books, and I want to explore that some more. So all I'm going to say here is just I really enjoyed this book, and I can understand why so many people like it, and I have very high expectations now for the rest of the series. So now that brings me to my favorite book of January, a book that I got in the middle of the month, stopped all my other books to read, and finished it in the week, and that is going to be Hellbent by Leigh Bardugo. I loved Ninth House, so it's not a big surprise that I loved Hellbent. If you don't know anything about Ninth House, I'll link it above. I did a full in-depth review about this one. Hellbent more or less picks up where Ninth House left off. A few months have gone by. We have our main character, Alex Stern. She works for this club called Lath House, and Lath House is basically supposed to patrol all of the other secret societies that are at Yale University. So Yale has all these secret societies that use magic in different ways. So one of the societies use magic to create portals to travel around. One society uses their magic to summon the dead and talk to them. Some control the weather. Lath House is supposed to make sure that all their rituals stay on script, nothing gets out of hand, blah, 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 blah. And of course, there is murders, and Alex has to figure out if any of the houses were involved in it, even though they all claim they don't. The main story in this one, the A plot, is that there was a young boy that was part of Lath House. His name was Daniel Arlington, aka Darlington. And in book 1, we never got to know Darlington. We only saw him through flashbacks. Because in the current time, Darlington has been missing. And all of book 1, he's just missing. That was never the A storyline in book 1. It was not even the B. It was a C storyline that he was this guy that was charismatic, that everyone loved, and he had mysteriously disappeared, and no one knew where he went or what happened to him. Most people assumed he was dead. Alex wasn't so sure. In this book, Darlington becomes the A storyline. Again, even though Alex still doesn't know exactly where he is, exactly what happened to him, or even if he's alive or not, she thinks that there is a chance that she could save him. And again, even though she doesn't know if she can, she has to try, because that is the thing about Alex. She can't just let things go. She has to try. And oh boy, does that lead to a wild chain of events, Definitely want to do a deep dive on this one. So all I will say here, because I've been talking for so long, I feel like, is that I think if you liked Ninth House, you will definitely like Hellbent. If you did not like Ninth House, I don't think you would like Hellbent any better. I think they're very much, cut from the same cloth. I was a little bit worried when I started this one because it had a lot of the same stuff from the first book, but ultimately I ended up loving it. Definitely my favorite book of January, and potentially could end up on my top 10 list for 2023, but it's still early, so you never know. So that is all the books that I read in January, and if you've been around my channel for a while, you might be saying, hey Chris, where's your Stephen King book? Because I am always reading a Stephen King book. And I did start a Stephen King book in the beginning of January, and that was Rose Madder. Unfortunately, because Hellbent took away from reading all my other books, I had to kind of pause a little bit on Rose Madder. I have not DNF'd it. I'm still reading it. It's still going to be part of my February TBR. It is a bit hard, though, for me to read. It's hard for me to read. I'm not going to talk about it here right now. I'll talk about it more once I finish it, maybe in my vlog. We'll see. But let's just say that even though I didn't finish Rose Madder in January, this is going on my February TBR. So other than Rose Madder, I have a pretty aggressive TBR for February, considering there are less days in the month, because I have 7 other books picked out. There's only 28 days in February, and I'm also getting ready to go on a huge trip in March. But let's start off with my reader recommendation for February, of which I have 2. I have 2 because one of these books is very, very short, and that's going to be I Bleed Starseeds by Nymheria. If you do not know who Nymheria is, shame on you, but Nymheria is a fellow booktuber, and she's also an author tuber. This is actually her first published book, and it's a book of poems that are, I would say they're more like horror poetry, but as someone personally who does not read a ton of poetry, I think anyone can read these, and oh man, I've already read it. I've already read this book in the first few days of February because I couldn't stop myself. Now, I do want to go back and reread some of my favorites because Nymheria, if you're watching this, you just have such a way with words, and I really hope that this is not the last book of poetry that you do, because I really enjoyed it, and I hope more people get a chance to read it, and I hope you get a chance to write more. So because that book is small, I did add a second recommendation to my TBR, and that's going to be Once Upon a Broken Heart by Stephanie Garber. Stephanie Garber is the same woman who wrote the Carver series, and a follower of mine over on Instagram recommended this book to me, so I'm going to give it a try and see how it goes. I really loved the first Carver. Didn't like Legendary. I did like Finale a little bit, but not as much as the original. So we'll see where this falls in the ranking of Stephanie Garber books. I already talked about my Stephen King book, so that brings me to my adult fantasy book for the month, which is going to be The Winter of the Witch by Katherine Arden. This is the 3rd and final book in the Winter Night trilogy that started with The Bear and the Nightingale, The Girl in the Tower. This series is just, it's just so good. It is so good. Like, I just love it so much. And I've heard a lot of people tell me that this one is really good too, which is not surprising because both the first and second books were great. So really looking forward to seeing how this series winds up. Next up, I have what I call my rando book of the month. I have a slot for just a random book of any genre that I can slide in, and this month I decided to go with Earthly Joys by Philippa Gregory. Why did I decide to go with this book? Philippa Gregory is one of my all-time favorite authors, all-time. I love her, and I've almost read every book that she's ever written. This is one of the few books, though, that I haven't. And because I haven't read a Philippa Gregory book in quite a while, since 2020, I want to say, maybe 2021, I thought it was about time that I got back to her. And honestly, I'm trying to do more of I want to read what I want to read, and I want to read a Philippa Gregory book. So yeah. This is an old book. It's not a new release. Probably not many people have read it or even have heard about it, but that's okay. Hopefully I can introduce you to something new if this book turns out to be as good as I hope that it will be. Next up, I have my YA Fantasy of the Month, which is a book I am super excited about, or at least I was excited until I saw the size of this thing, and that is Chain of Thorns by Cassandra Clare. This is the 3rd and final book in the Last Hour series, But if you're familiar with Cassandra Clare, she has written a bazillion books. They're all part of the Shadowhunter world. The Last Hours is just the most recent trilogy that she did. It started with Chain of Gold, and then there was Chain of Iron. Now there is Chain of Thorns, and I had no idea how chunky this book would be when I decided to add it to my TBR. But I am excited that I am buddy reading this with Kelly over at Kelly Reads a Lot. I was so excited to find another booktuber who is just as into the Shadowhunter books as I am. So Kelly and I have just started our experience of reading Chain of Thorns, and I can't wait to have someone to chit-chat about this with throughout the month. Next up, I have my middle grade fantasy of the month, and I'm kind of cheating because this isn't really considered middle grade. It's kind of YA, but it's like the younger side of YA, the older side of middle grade, and that is I'm continuing the Raven Cycle series with Blue Lily, Lily Blue, Maggie Steifvater. This is the third book, not the final, because there's more than 3 books in this series, but technically this series was recommended to me by one of my subscribers over on Instagram. So I kind of have like 2 or 3 recommendations going on this month. So I'm taking care of a bunch of recommendations at once this month. With how well I liked the Raven Boys and then the Dream Thieves, I have very high expectations that I will like Blue Lily, Lily Blue as well. And if those books weren't enough, I am also adding another book box book to my pile, and that is going to be The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. I did a poll over on Instagram to help pick me out a book box book for this month, and everyone voted on The Gilded Ones, so that is what I am reading. I want to say that this is actually like one of the first books I ever got from Owl Crate, which is crazy. So clearly I've had it for way too long and haven't read it. And just, I mean, I'm in awe of how beautiful this cover is. So I am super excited to dive into this one. Now that I've been talking forever, it's time to wrap this up. Thanks for watching my January wrap-up and my February TBR. Jack says, thank you for coming along for the ride, but I want a treat. So as always, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you're not already, please subscribe to my channel and let me know how your reading went for January. Are there any books that you're excited to read in February? Let me know all of your things in the comments section below. And as always, happy reading!